We need to widen the lens. The strategic mode of 2026 is not just China. It's not just a Chinese model, it's global. I mean, that's dangerous. That's very dangerous because the autocratic model is becoming seductive precisely as its core contradiction are surfacing. Reuters reported in April 2025 that the effective US tariffs um, rate had jumped to 22%. It's the highest since 1910 after the Civil War. And subsequent reporting in July said US consumers were facing tariff level around 16%, already the highest since 1930. Um, um, with some estimates pushing the effective rate above 20% after an additional truth. Another Reuters market analyst citing yields budget lab suggests that the average effective yield average rate was 25.3% or 18.1%, even after likely substitution away from Chinese goods. Again, the highest since the interwar era. That's not a marginal policy adjustment, that's a regime shift. And the global trading system is already showing this trend. Reuters reported in April 2025 that the WTO believed the new tariffs could lead to a contraction around 1% in global merchandise trade volumes that year. The WTO's March 2026 outlook then projected world trade growth by at only 1.9% for 2026, down from 4.6% in 2025. Estimated that the share of the world trade conducted under most favored nation terms had fallen from around 80% to 72%. That sounds technical. It's not. It means the baseline, non-discriminatory fabric of global commerce is tightening. And when the baseline tightens, more the market is available for innovation, specialization, and diffusion shrinks with it. So the World Bank diagram is even more explicit. It's 2025 report, as summarized by Reuters, found that the FDI flows into developing economies in 2023 fell to the lowest level since 2005, and into advanced economies to the lowest since 1996. The blank blamed growing investment and trade barrier fragmentation, geopolitical risk, and state trade growth from 2020 to 2024 was the lowest since 2000. This is the empirical record of resilience when it mutates into habitual restriction. Smaller capital pools, slower fusion, weaker growth. So now to be very clear, resilience is not fake. States need secure supply chain and semiconductors and energy and critical minerals and defense input, but resilience is not a constraint to manage, not an organizing religion for the entire economy. Once it becomes an all-purpose doctrine, governments start mistaking duplication for stringent inclusion and insulation for sovereignty. The result is exactly what the 2025 Global Work and Innovations warns against: a smaller arena for creative destruction, higher entry costs, and more room for incumbents to hide behind patriotic language while living off protected trends. Associate Press reporting on 2025's Nobel Prize put it plainly: markets with too few dominant companies can hinder innovation and good, and societies need institutions that make it easy to move people and capital toward more productive uses. Tariff walls and national champion politics move in the opposite directions, and be sure it does this. So yes, the West should de-risk. It should not demarket. It should diversify supply chain. It should not romanticize permanent inefficiency. The moment policymakers start speaking as if efficiency itself were suspect, they have already conceded the argument to the state capitalists. And the state capitalists, let me repeat, are paying an increasingly price for that worldview themselves. So let's talk about Mary's also reality. I mean, this is the core political economy issue. In capitalism, capital is supposed to chase the highest expected future return. It's very obvious. I mean, if you read Adam Smith, even from Adam Smith to Milton Friedman, all has written this. In autocracy, however, capital increasingly chase permission. That is the difference between merit allocation and loyalty allocation. It is the difference between a system that continuously reprices the future and one that continuously protects the coalition in charge of defining it. The IMF's 2025 Working paper on industrial policy in China is one of the cleanest quantifications of this problem you will ever read. It estimates the equivalent fiscal cost of China's industrial policy at 4.4% of GDP out of 2023, with cash subsidies at 2% of GDP, tax benefits at 1.5%, land subsidized at 0.5%, and subsidized credit at 0.4%. It then estimated that factory misallocation associated with that industrial policy reduces domestic aggregate TFP by about 1.2% and can reduce GDP by up to 2%. The same paper found that subsidies tend to create excess production, while trade and regulatory barriers raise incumbent power. And that market leading firms out there position not only to better productivity, but also to policy encouraging them to produce at an efficient and high levels. That is the state capitalist business model in one paragraph. Spend heavily, distort prices, protect incumbents, call the outcome a strategy. Reuters has been documenting the same logic in real life, in real time, but it's real life, of course, all of them are real life. In March 2026, Beijing moved to tighten oversight of local government subsidies because local authorities were offering support beyond their authority to lure high-tech projects, right? Filling excess capacity and cutthroat competition. In July 2025, Reuters reported that China's auto sector was reeling from overcapacity and extended price wars severe enough that regulators and the executives alike warned that turmoil was undermining long-term viability. And solar, the industry has been trapped in recurring losses and pleas for a solution to overcapacity. That's what happens when officials usually chase sectoral prestige and subsidize credit on land. They produce too much of the wrong thing at too low a return. Then must step in again to contain the second order damage, right? And the loyalty problem is not theoretical either. And the readers reporting on Senghua, either Tsinghua or Senghua, I don't know the exact framing of that. Unigroup is almost a caricature of the national champion trap. The company was supposed to be a domestic semiconductor champion, and instead, under Zhou Weigu or Vigu, it spent billions not only on cheap acquisitions, but on unrelated and unprofitable ventures such as real estate and online gambling, defaulted on bonds and entered bankruptcy, while Zhao himself was later handed a suspended death sentence for corruption and embezzlement. That was not the meritocratic capital allocation looks like. That's what happens when large pools of security, large pools of strategic money, strategic money are concentrated in political protected hands that face weak discipline until the bill arrives. So contrast that with what the OECD says about actual frontier firms and market system. I mean, the most productive firms across the OECD countries are typically larger, more profitable, younger, more likely to patent, and more likely to be a part of multinational groups, right? So that's very crucial. I mean, OECD research says that well-designed framework policies help productivity diffusion by sharpening incentives for technological adaptation and by reallocating resources to the most productive firms. That's the market mechanism state capitalism can never replicate. Because the state capitalism can tolerate reward, but it cannot tolerate displacement. It struggles to tolerate displacement. The biotech example is revealing here. I mean, China has built a serious popular. Global pharma is licensing Chinese molecules in record quantities. But Merix notes, it's MERICS, notes that the price controls and reimbursement bargaining have cut launch prices for new drugs by roughly 50% to 65%, limiting domestic profitability, dumping investor interest, and leaving top Chinese biopharma firms spending around 10% of revenue on research and development versus about 20% for Western peers. In plain English, I would say the system wants innovation, but it also wants price discipline, political oversight, and social control. And the result is that many of the most advanced Chinese firms still focus on North American and European markets or partners to monetize their science. Again, scale and capability exist. The internal institutional regime still taxes the frontier. So what shall the rest do? That's the main question. It's time for talking about the policy. You're right, policy part. And this is where lots of conservatives, lots of nationalists, lots of technocrats get lazy. The correct act of the Beijing is not the latest fair mythology, but neither is it limitation. The West does need a strategy. It needs export controls and narrowly defined security domains. It needs defense procurement. It needs basic science funding, immigration reform for top talent, critical infrastructure, and faster permitting for a strategic industry. But it must resist turning these tools into an administrative relation. Governments should set conditions, not run the discovery phase. They should widen the field, not to designate a priesthood of permanent priorities. The OECD's 2026 framework is useful precisely because it is not ideological theater, it separates policy into enabling factors, market incentives, and targeted policy. The first two are horizontal: macro stability, institutions, property rights, governance, competition, tax designs, business dynamism, and the reallocation and the reallocation of labor and capital. Targeted policies exist, but the OECD is explicit that they are justified, mainly where the clear market failures of externalities are present, and the theory effectiveness depends heavily on the quality of horizontal framework, which are competition, business dynamism, and the capacity to shift scarce resources toward innovative firms. That is the distinction many Western leaders are now blurring. They want the third category, but they're doing the first two. That is how you get expensive symbolism and medical results. So, what should a pro-Western realist program actually look like? First, make property rights and contract enforcement boringly reliable. Second, deepen capital markets so filers do not have to leave for the United States to escape. Reuters' 2025 report on the EU's European Union's plan to scale up Europe Fund admitted that the United States provides about seven more time more latest stage scale up financing than Europe. That is the real, and that's not clues by slogan about sovereignty. It's clues by legal, fiscal, and financial architecture that rewards risk taking. Third, enforce competition policy that prevents um, oligarchic I would say, incumbency. So fourth, make bankruptcy fast and not stigmatizing, so capital can be recycled. Fifth, tie state support to open competition, sunset clauses, and measurable spillovers rather than to the political prestige of a minister or the lobbying muscle of a giant firm. And yes, even the United States must hear this. Reuters reported in May 2026 that Washington was taking equity stakes across nine quantum firms, while earlier interventions made the government a major shareholder in Intel and MP materials. Some of that may be defensible in a narrow national security frame, but let us not lie to ourselves. Once a state gets addicted to equity position, direct industrial patronage, and permanent champions politics, they start to inherit the same information problem that cripples the autocracies. Bureaucrats are not omniscient investors. If they were, the Soviet Union would still exist, and Tsenghua Unigroup would be a global chip colossus. It is not. So the West edge was never that its officials were smarter than everyone else. Its edge was that it built system in which nobody needed to be wise enough to plan the whole future. Millions of decentralized decisions, disciplined by prices, law, competition, and finance, did the work. That's why capitalist system can absorb error and keep it moving. Instead, capitalist systems can suppress error for a while. Then the suppressed errors arrive all at once as debts or capacity corruption or capacity or capital flight. So here's our verdict. The Beijing consensus is not a resilient alternative to capitalism. It is a structural compromise and impressive mobilization in exchange for economic distortion. It can produce champions, but it cannot comfortably discipline them. It can generate patents, but it not always profit. It can build clusters, but not always contestable ecosystem. It can narrow the gap in model performance, but it still depends on administrative pressure, strategic supervision, external market access, increasingly expensive industrial correction to keep the machine moving. That is not the architecture of durable national power. It is the architecture of a state forever trying to outrun the consequence of its own needs for control. And the West must not make the catastrophic mistake of learning precisely the wrong lesson. If your rival has overcapacity, do not imitate his subsidy addiction. If your rival relies on political control, do not answer by hollowing out your own market order. If your rival treats firms as instruments of state prestige, do not turn your own economy into a parrot ground with better branding. The lesson from data is precisely clear. Growth, innovation, and strategic that come from inclusive institutions, broad property rights, competition, openness to capital and talent, and a political order willing to let old winners die so new one can emerge. Capitalism wins not because it's morally spotless. It wins because it's the only system ruthless enough to replace itself from within. That is what creative destruction means. That is what frontier innovation demands. And that is what national power, if it is to remain real and not theatrical, must be built on. Not permanent protection, not loyalty network, not national champions fat in a shelter market. A state is strong enough to enforce rule and humble enough to let the market discover the future. Anything less is not a strategy. It is control. It's control, decline with patriotic branding.